Good morning. My name is Alan Estevez. I am with Deloitte's Defense, Security, and Justice sector. In a previous life, I was the Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, where I had the great pleasure of overseeing DARPA and the lab infrastructure of the Department of Defense. The reality is that while the Department of Defense has a great R&D infrastructure, the Department of Defense relies on partnership and access to technology produced by the commercial sector. In order to sustain its overmatch and in order to deter and defeat potential adversaries, the Department of Defense has to have that access. In addition, it's not just going to be the kinetic weapons that we're used to in the previous wars of missiles, ships, tanks, airplanes. It's going to be ones and zeros that win wars. So I think this is a very important panel for us to listen to. I'm pleased to introduce Kara Swisher, co-founder and editor at large of Recode. She's been called Silicon Valley's premier journalist. Kara is also a producer and host of the Recode, Decode, and Pivot podcasts, co-executive producer of the Code Conference series. She has written in the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and is the author of several tech-related books. So over to you, Kara, for this great panel.
Thank you very much. So I want to get started. We're going to talk about a wide range of things because I think one of the things that's important is to consider the role of technology. It's been brought up in a lot of panels along the edges. Coming from Silicon Valley, it's pretty clear that most of the technologies being used are going to be critical in the years ahead and have already been to start with. Even just this week, with the national freak out over the Face app, which apparently Vladimir Putin is trying to steal American faces. I don't know why, but he is, and it's very dangerous. It is actually about the bigger issue of the ongoing global cyber war in lots of ways. So we're going to talk about a range of issues and have each of them introduce themselves. And we have to talk about the players, what the U.S. needs to do, what it's not doing, the talent necessary for what's coming, and what the big technologies are going to be that everybody needs to pay attention to. Yesterday, the Admiral talked about the idea that this investment needs to be ongoing, very critically, noting that China would probably surpass us militarily, especially in the technology sector, by the mid-century. I think that's what he said. They certainly are already doing that commercially in a lot of areas, including AI, automation, robotics, and some critical areas. So we're going to talk about talent and where it's going. Why don't each of you introduce yourselves to explain this very diverse panel of white men in blazers here, which makes me feel comfortable that I'm in Silicon Valley, except it would be T-shirts. Anyway, please start.
Okay. I'm Michael Brown. Today I'm the director of the Defense Innovation Unit, which is headquartered in Silicon Valley, but with offices in Boston, Austin, and in DC. And I've spent almost my entire career in the private sector, CEO of Symantec, and before that, CEO of Quantum.
And Tucker Bailey, I'm a partner with McKinsey & Company in our Washington, D.C. office. I help lead our cybersecurity practice in North America, and I also serve the Department of Defense and the intelligence community.
I'm Edward Screven. I'm Oracle's Chief Corporate Architect. I provide direction across all the engineering and technical work that we do. Oracle Labs reports to me. I have various parts of the engineering organization working for me, and I'm in charge of security at Oracle, both our internal security and our product security assurance.
All right, why don't we start with Edward? Oracle does an enormous amount of business with the government and provides systems and things like that to the government. Why don't you talk first about what you think right now the biggest challenges from your perspective the U.S. government faces on the global scene?
Well, I mean, I think yes, I think. Sorry. I have a quiet voice. I apologize.
Yeah.
All right. So listen. I think the problems that the U.S. government faces actually are very similar to what our large commercial customers have traditionally faced, right? Which is that when they've thought about solving information problems, and they thought about applying computer technology to their particular problem domain, they haven't really approached it in a coherent, cohesive way. And so what they've done is they've built lots of different, stovepipe systems, with lots of different technologies that don't integrate well. And in fact, they spend a lot of money, far more money, trying to integrate these systems and run the systems than they do actually acquiring them, right? Now that's exactly the circumstance that our large commercial customers found themselves in a few years ago and are now improving. Now, the security angle of that is, of course, if I build a lot of heterogeneous systems with lots of different interfaces, with lots of different technologies, and I have huge numbers of human beings trying to keep it all running, it's nearly impossible to make it secure. I mean, you just cannot take a traditional IT infrastructure and have a high degree of assurance that it is secure. I mean, we build a lot of security technology for products that we deliver to our customers, right? But after we hand it over to our customers, what happens? Well, lots of human beings try to make it work with lots of other different components from lots of different vendors, right? There's a much better way, okay? The much better way is cloud computing. So when we built our cloud, where we run enterprise workloads, both for government and for private enterprises, we're very, very focused on making sure that we have fundamentally secure infrastructure that our customers can consume and therefore become fundamentally secure themselves.
So what he's talking about is the cloud. Everyone knows what cloud, your emails in the cloud and everything else. But the idea is that a lot of these systems are moving to cloud systems. The government has been much slower to do this for security reasons and largely because it's largely incompetent when it comes to technology compared to most organizations. And that they do on-premises work that is done by all these integrators all around the Beltway, which used to be called the Beltway Bandits when I covered them for the Washington Post. Tucker, why don't you?
Yeah, so I agree with Edward's point on the security architectures. One of the most acute challenges that we're seeing is actually around talent. So you think about digital talent and the talent that's required to compete and succeed in this space. The DoD is now competing with Silicon Valley, and when you look at the population of the skills that are required, I've seen estimates that the number of the 10Xers, which folks from Silicon Valley are familiar with that, right? Those coders and technologists that are 10X more productive than the mean. The average of those are in the low thousands. And then when you further winnow that down to the number that can get a security clearance, that are willing to take a government paycheck, that are willing to go through the turnstiles and not have access to a lot of the tools that they typically have, you get to a very small population. So how do you compete for that talent? It's very challenging. Then there's the point of how do you actually, if you're competing for that talent, and that's a challenge, how do you also grow talent? And this is where the Department of Defense in the uniform side is starting to make great progress, especially on cybersecurity and some of these other domains. They're creating career fields for these folks, but then you run into retention issues because right when you get to the point where they're competent and talented, they're now in extremely high demand and are being recruited away by the private sector, often at 3 or 4 times what they're getting paid as a military person.
Right.
And so then the military and the IC says, well, we can compete on mission, right? We're going to appeal to their sense of mission, and they're going to have a platform to do that here. But if you look at cybersecurity professionals, if they're defending the national grid or core banking infrastructure, that's also mission-related work. That's national security. So that mission proposition starts to break down a little bit as well. Mm-hmm. So significant challenge there. I'm happy to talk about more.
And you yourself, who worked for the government and then now is in the private sector, correct?
That's correct, but
yeah.
now giving back.
Okay, sure, okay, whatever you say. So in that area of talent, I mean, you can't underscore how much these technology companies need the talent. The main ones being Oracle, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and others that have all these challenges that the government faces. And can pay enormous amounts of money as their stock prices increase and things like that. Can you just for a second also talk about the idea of training and the problems of our education system
Sure.
compared to China, in India, and even France these days, which are putting enormous amounts of money into the training of more and more people to be able to do these jobs?
That's a great point. It's another challenge. And we looked at secondary and post-secondary education, particularly for digital talent. And one of the things that we found is a lot of universities are building digital programs, AI programs, cyber programs, but under a traditional bachelor's or master's degree model. And what employers and what the DoD and the IC is saying is, I don't care if they have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, I care that they have these competencies. And they can be a philosophy major, they can have a GED, I don't care, produce that kind of talent. And what they're saying is there's a bid-ask spread between the kind of talent that they need and what the academic system is producing. And then if you look in the Washington, D.C. area, where a lot of this talent demand is for the U.S. government, the D.C. metro region produces 3x more digital talent than any other metropolitan standard area. The problem is that that's only a third of the demand for that talent in the D.C. region, and most of that talent is getting recruited out of D.C. and going to places like Silicon Valley, going to Austin, where there's a slightly more vibrant innovation community. There are startups, so they can go from, I'm gonna go to a startup, I'm gonna go work at a large company, I might go to academia for a little bit and bounce around all in the same area. And DC, is challenged in that way. But there are some really interesting programs where local employers, including US government and the IC, is actually partnering with local universities to create certification programs to say, hey, if you produce graduates with these skills, I don't care what their degree is, I will guarantee that I will interview a certain number, and I will hire anyone that meets our hiring criteria.
Yeah.
So there's some good innovation happening there.
And it's also hindered by what is largely a homogeneous group of people going into the sector.
That's right.
Which is to say, young white men, essentially, versus all kinds of other populations that seem to be opting out of that. And even the main tech companies suffer from this with persistent data that they put out every year that shows the same stubborn patterns of workplace makeup, essentially. All right.
If I could just offer on the talent point, I think that's one of the reasons why Ash Carter set up the Defense Innovation Unit, because this is a way.
Can you explain that?
Sure. The Defense Innovation Unit, which he set up in 2015, was recognizing that a lot more innovation is happening, especially in certain sectors, what we call dual use, means commercial use plus military use, AI being example, cyber, commercial space, which we're going to hear a little bit about later, autonomy. These are areas where there's a tremendous amount of investment relative to what the military is spending, and I include in that the defense industrial base, the traditional players. So in fact, in 1960, 1/3 of global R&D was tied to the US military. Incredible. That number today is 3.7%. So it just shows how much is happening outside, and if we want leading technology, if we want the military to have access to that, we've got to reach out and bring that technology into the military. So again, as it relates to talent, one way to have the folks who are out in those innovation hubs contribute, since it's so difficult to hire if you're the government, is to take advantage of what they're doing in the private sector and bring that work in, which is something Defense Innovation Unit does. We also have a program, Hacking for Defense. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. Real problems that the military has taken to the universities. So let's get professors, veterans, and folks who've never been exposed to national security problems all in the same room trying to solve these things. And hopefully some of those folks will be interested in the work that the national security community does.
So the challenge that you find the most important one that you're facing is it's not so much that there isn't innovation happening as it's not happening directed by the government, and the government's probably best technological feat, besides the moon landing, which of course we're celebrating now, would be the internet, which it created. But talk about what you think the most challenging part of that is.
Well, the most challenging part is how do we take advantage of all that technology that makes our economy run so well and have an easier way for the Defense Department to be a customer. So now we have the challenge as the Defense Department to say, how can we look like we're an easy customer to do business with? So you can imagine that's an aspirational goal that we have. We have authorities and process to allow us to go faster, and what we're trying to do is work at commercial speed, on commercial terms, not start with a big requirements document, but just a problem statement that comes from somewhere in the military. I need this.
Give me an example, for example.
So a good example would be how can we save maintenance costs on aircraft? Think of all the aircraft the military has. And so we went to one of the vendors of commercial airlines, in fact, the vendor that supplies Southwest and Delta Airlines, and said, how about thinking about working with the military? This was already a successful commercial company that really had no interest at the time we went to them working with the military, but the ideal kind of vendor for us to be working with because they've got a successful commercial business to build on. Other people's money, investors, had invested in that platform, and that company will continue to innovate on that platform. This is the ideal kind of vendor for the Defense Department where we're not, as the taxpayers, funding all of that development and then the maintenance of that, which, as you probably know, is a big part of the military budget. And The Air Force, it's 60–70% of the cost is maintaining the fleet. So in this case, we said, how about prototyping with one of the aircraft in the U.S. Air Force, a small volume aircraft, the E-3. We showed we could save 28 to 32% of unscheduled maintenance costs using AI and a platform and ingesting data. In this case, it was just simple logs, handwritten data. And now we're pioneering that across different aircraft, not only in the Air Force, but also Navy and Marines. So this is the kind of idea that we want to work on that has transformative capability across the military, so not just working on one niche kind of problem, and create big benefits in terms of costs and readiness.
It's already being done.
It's already, yeah.
And innovated elsewhere and paid for by others.
Right, that's right.
Paid for by the private sector. Edward, talk about the technologies that you think are critical for government officials, not just the Defense Department, but because security is now everywhere, like including election, including all kinds of things, and obviously Microsoft's showing off this election protection kind of stuff. Talk a little bit about what you think the key technologies that maybe we aren't paying as much attention to that are critical for the government to be part of.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what we focus on, what we think is most important for our customers, whether government or otherwise. And one thing that's unique about Oracle is that we have a really wide range of technology from the very bottom, like CPUs and storage, all the way up to very sophisticated applications, right? And so because of that, it lets us focus on defense in depth when we engineer products together, right? So instead of having to think about how are we going to build a secure solution that involves multiple vendor products, I mean, we can create a complete secure stack. Now that fundamentally rests though on that secure infrastructure level. So when we built our cloud, one of the things that we did is we realized that we just can't predict all the kinds of vulnerabilities that are going to pop up in the world, right? And you saw this with Intel processors, over the last few years, right? So flaws that no one could possibly imagined, existing in Intel processors that would allow data to leak, from one customer to another if they happen to be running software on the same computer. So fortunately for us, when we built our cloud, the way we did is we actually took all of the security processing for the infrastructure level and we pulled it out of the computer that's running the customer's code. So we actually, when you use our cloud, there's actually two computers involved, right? There's a security processor computer and there's the application computer. And so because of that, no matter what code, your code, a bad actor's code, happens to be running in that application computer, it cannot break out of the enclave, that exists for that one particular customer. Okay, and that's just kind of example of when you move to cloud, just having a different way of thinking about the problem. That's not a kind of solution that any customer could have built for themselves. It's not even a solution we could have built ourselves to deliver to a customer, but it is something that we were able to build in our cloud. And going along with that, of course, I think is we've done a lot of work in terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning to observe patterns of behavior that we see within our networks in order to help us detect incidents that we should investigate, right? And so at the very lowest levels of our infrastructure, we're scanning all the packets that are flowing through our network, looking for patterns, that indicate not necessarily match some bad behavior, because that's not enough, because new kinds of bad behavior pop up all the time, right? What matters is looking for patterns of behavior that are different. Okay, so when we see some variance from what we expect, well, that's something we should look at. That's something we should investigate. Sometimes it's perfectly, in fact, most of the time, almost all the time, it's perfectly fine. It's just some different kind of application. Sometimes it's something which actually shows some customer has actually been breached through the software they've connected to the internet.
Or just watching what comes over the pipe. I mean, you see this in the commercial space with Facebook trying to identify all bad actors, essentially, what's happening across the internet.
Which so I think that it's and that's why I'm actually
they're doing such a good
job. I'm actually a cybersecurity optimist. It's very easy to think, hey, the world is ending.
You're the one.
Yes, the world is ending because because there are state actors out there, and there are, right, who are very aggressive, very talented, and incredibly well-funded, right? And their interests are not commercial, and so therefore, they don't take advantage of the flaws they find right away, and so they could be there for years just waiting, right? But the reason why I'm an optimist is that in fact, I think the kinds of things that we're building at Oracle in our cloud and just cloud computing in general is actually changing the asymmetry that used to exist. I mean, in the old days, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, okay,
It's 2 weeks ago now.
right. Well, what you had is vast numbers of IT installations around the world managed by large numbers of people, okay, who have to do everything right every day not to be vulnerable. So of course they're vulnerable, right? And then you have a cadre of attackers out there looking all the time, looking for vulnerabilities all the time, right? And it's just madness. You have one attacker, right? Thousands of potential targets. Okay, all of those thousands of potential targets have to invest large amounts of money to try to be secured. Okay, that's just grossly inefficient. They could never spend enough money in aggregate to be secure in aggregate. But if you concentrate, right? If you use Oracle Cloud or other technologies like that, right? Okay, well now there's many fewer places that we have to defend, and we can afford to spend a lot of money securing that infrastructure because it's used by thousands and thousands of customers.
The vulnerability is that there's one now place, so that if it does get attacked, that's.
Well, I think, yeah, I've heard that sort of argument before. I don't really buy it, right? And the reason why is that if you look at a cloud infrastructure, you can't possibly build it and run it unless it's homogeneous. Okay, I mean, you couldn't afford to do it, right? And so because our cloud infrastructure is homogeneous, right, we can watch it very, very closely, and we can apply technologies to it that we could never dream of applying, in a more traditional, IT setup.
So one of the parts that gives advantages, though, to those who have more malevolent or state attacks on anyone is the idea that their work is within the military, like in the Chinese military. That's a path for upward mobility in China. Same thing with Russia. It's very closely tied to the government. You're in the ways that it isn't here. Talk about what we need to do to combat that, because I think our only thing is to be have competitiveness, right? But talk about what we need to do to improve that, because we're not going to have a cadre of people in the military that are going to stay there. We're just not.
Right.
It's just not going to happen that way.
No, it's a great point. And so there's a couple approaches. One is fundamentally rethinking the talent model. So instead of a 20-year civil service or military system where you're 20, you get a retirement, everything's right. That's just not the way the workforce is working today. And Silicon Valley and other places have adapted to that. The US government has not, by and large, because we have these traditional career paths. So a couple things that I've seen the government doing to be successful there is for certain skill fields, and cyber is one of those, they finally rethought a couple of the models. So there's one model where we're going to bring in young cyber warriors, and the value proposition is we're going to train them. They're going to have a 3 to 4 year commitment. And then the expectation is that they're actually going to go out into industry, into private.
So that they can learn the new stuff, because what happens is people that are in government don't know the latest or haven't been working.
That's the argument.
So cyber warriors that come in, they have really, really cool pocket protectors, those people. No, I've never heard of cyber warriors, but okay. So they would come in for a short time, which a lot of people are trying. They've been trying to do this with some mixed results.
Correct. And so the next horizon is how do we think about an in-out-in model where maybe we train them, maybe they go out to private industry, sharpen their skills out there, get exposed to that, and then do we have the mechanisms to bring them back in?
Right.
And right now, that almost takes an act of Congress to bring somebody back in, find a job description, go through the clearance process. But how do you reduce some of that friction so that folks can, job hop to some degree, which is, something that you see quite a bit for this talent.
So what would be a good example of that? Because let's say they're in a military service or they're in a government service, and then they go out to, Silicon Valley, which I always call assisted living for millennials, because they get everything they want: dry cleaning, free kombucha stands.
That's right.
a massage, but not the Jeffrey Epstein kind, and then others. So, come on. All right, anyway, they just get a lot. They get a lot of perks, including money and everything else. It's a very comfortable place to work. How do you then create that, besides appealing to patriotism,
Right.
which I think is what they have been doing?
Right, so there's a couple ways. One is, can we actually start with a longer term arrangement, either with the individual or with those companies? So for example, take a Google, right? Come to DoD, you're gonna serve for 4 or 5 years, and then we're going to guarantee a certain spot, at a certain level, with the company, with the expectation that someday you'll come back. Maybe it's a requirement, maybe it's not, right? Because you want to create that dynamic marketplace and you want to keep your own value proposition sharp. But also, as you think about what are the skills that we need to build, which may not be in our Cyber 101, for example, training pipeline. So let's say you come to the military for 4 years, you're an offensive cyber operator, you then go out to a utilities company and you're working on the defensive side. You're now learning SCADA systems, industrial control, you're learning the vulnerabilities there, and then bringing that back into the government as they think about holistic kind of national defense for cyber. And then also on the offensive side, because they've been now exposed to those specific capabilities, which are in demand.
And these companies are fighting nation states. I mean, you really are. I mean, which is one of the problems, is that they aren't getting as much help. They're doing the work the government used to do.
And Kara, this is a huge challenge, because if you're a big bank, right, you're seeing losses every day from cyber, right? The fraudsters are very sophisticated, using the cyber domain to commit fraud, steal money, et cetera. So the business case is there for them to make the investment because they're countering day-to-day losses. If you look at utilities players, big infrastructure providers, they aren't seeing the day-to-day losses because their adversaries aren't the fraudsters. They're the nation states who have that persistent presence, can come in and sit and wait. But because they don't have the day-to-day losses, oftentimes the business case breaks down when it gets to the CFO. And then there's a bit of a perverse incentive, which is if we have a bad day, it's a national security issue, and the US government will come in and help us.
Right.
And I think the reality is that the government's just not equipped and resourced to do that at that scale.
But you kind of saw at Facebook. They kind of got into that, and it got too late before they understood what was happening there. Or maybe they did. We'll see. We'll see.
And that's a fairly minor example,
Yeah.
right? If you think, we've been talking about great power conflict. If you actually think about great power conflict and activities in the cyber domain will be at scale commensurate with what's happening in the kinetic realm, right? Can we scale rapidly enough, not just to defend DoD networks, but critical national infrastructure?
Including electrical grids.
Absolutely.
And things like that. Do you think about that, the other things? Because defense is now more than, in this recent back and forth with China, for example, and Russia, we're disrupting their networks, they're disrupting ours. Is that part of the purview now of these workers that work for you, or the idea of what we need to defend from?
Well,
Or that's always been the idea that you can send an electromagnetic, whatever.
Well, in the Defense Innovation Unit, we're focused more on what urgent warfighter needs can we solve with commercial solutions. So we're not working at the national level in the competition. But of course, we do spend time thinking about that. And I would just offer that what China is doing, in my mind, it's the most strategic threat of our generation. We can talk about declining powers and other dangerous places in the world like Iran. But if you look over the long term, the next few decades, China is the relationship that we have to understand and get right. And we're, in my mind, not doing the amount we should do to prepare for that. So none of us alive have ever lived through a time when there's going to be another economy that's bigger than ours. And I happen to have the view that national security follows economic security and prosperity. And technology is the new battleground that allows economic prosperity. So what do we need to do to prepare for that? So it's things like STEM education, federal funding of R&D, which in my mind produced a lot of the success we're seeing in the economy today. It's where Silicon Valley started, was government investment during the space race. So we need to think about what do we need to do to prepare for that, to make sure that we're making the investment fundamentally in science and technology, supporting technology and innovation in the economy, to make sure that we're as prosperous and competitive as possible in a world where we won't be the largest economy, according to most forecasters today.
We're going to get some questions in a minute, but I want to finish up by something. I was at an event last night with David Sanger from the New York Times, and they were talking about the concept of sovereign clouds, that the internet, which is this open, chaotic crazy zone, which has been great for everybody. Created all these billionaires, created all this wealth, innovation, everyone's got a cell phone, everything else. You can do apps, whatever you want to do. We may have to go back to that concept. I don't know if the idea of sovereign clouds, that there's a Berlin, I think David was using the idea of a Berlin Wall now we have to build, or that we have two internets, one authoritarian internet, which is led by China, which is spreading out all over the globe, or and the Western internet, which has been the one that's been dominated. I'd love to get a thought if that's the idea. And not just sovereign internets for countries or areas, but even companies. There's the Amazon sovereign cloud, there's the Google sovereign cloud, or the Oracle. How do you look at that concept?
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, there already is a sovereign cloud in China, right? I mean, it's just, it exists, right? I mean, so, but I don't think that you know, what we should do in the West is say, okay, there's going to be a West cloud that we're going to hive ourselves off from these other parties like Russia and China, whatever, you know, because we think there's a security threat, right? Because it wouldn't work, right? I mean, you know, they're right. It's just like, okay, you can't have billions of computers in the West, you know, connected to the internet, right? And somehow expect that you're going to be able to make sure that you know, that state, you know, actors outside the West can't get in. Of course they would get in. They would be in from day one, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any technical sense. You know, I also don't think it makes any economic sense, right? I mean, I 100% agree. Like, economic growth is the key to security, right? Okay, so what is the biggest engine of economic growth in the West? It's definitely the internet.
Technology.
Okay? And so trying to like say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to shackle the internet, you know, so that we're going to make it more secure. We could actually just turn it off. It'd be 100% secure if we just turned it off.
You know what? That would be great for a day.
Right. But it's just a bad idea, right? I think what we really need to do is invest in technologies that let an open internet be secure.
Yeah, maybe we'll just shut off Twitter. But go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to add how much I agree with what Edward said. It's one thing for China to have walled themselves off with a Great Wall. Great. We need to make sure that we collaborate even more closely with the rest of the world to be our allies, to make sure that we're all collaborating with open intellectual property backed by law, talent flow, capital flow. That's the way we're going to be stronger and have an impact on China's behavior. We put $80 trillion of GDP to work against the 12 million that they've walled off.
And then finally, before we get to questions, what's the one thing you think needs to be done over the next 5 years that's critical in each of your areas, whatever the area? Why don't we start with you, Tucker, and then...
Yeah, so from my perspective, it's actually harnessing some of the technology that started out there, be it robotic process automation, machine learning, AI. I think the DoD is making very good early strides there, but the concept that you can sprinkle AI on existing processes is really tough, and it requires a lot of unsexy work, like going through and thinking about the data rights in every contract that you write, so you get the training data and that kind of stuff, and then creating the infrastructure to where you can actually build those capabilities, put them into production in ways that actually scale and are sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, would you agree? I think right now, I don't think people realize the technologies coming are so much bigger than everything else that's come before.
That's right, and we've done research that suggests up to 40% of traditional vocations are going to be fundamentally disrupted by this technology. Some will be replaced outright. Some you're going to have to come to a new human-machine interface where the humans are doing the high cognitive function, the machines are doing the repetition, but it's going to require a massive reskilling of that talent as you're thinking about what's coming down the road.
And I always say everything that can be digitized will be digitized.
Absolutely.
Everything. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think you know, I think it's really for governments and commercial enterprises. It's you know, execute you know, the plan to move down this road of cloud computing, you know, efficiently and effectively, because I think fundamentally that's how we get more secure. That's how we you know, flip, you know, the asymmetry that currently exists between attackers and defenders.
And for the Defense Innovation Unit, building on cloud, there's many other commercial technologies, so I'd like to see them in very widespread use within the military rather than always relying on something that we designed ourselves. And then broader for the society, we've got to commit to a fundamental investment, a generational investment in science and technology for our own economic superiority and competitiveness for the future.
And where are we on that?
we're declining.
Yeah. I wanted you to say that.
We basically have seen a decline in
Yeah.
federal funding as a percentage of R&D. It was 2% of GDP in the 1960s, and now it's at 0.7 and declining. And I think, as we said before, we're still living off a lot of that prosperity, the internet, GPS, miniaturized electronics, on and on. We need to make that investment for the next 50 years. That's what China's doing today.
Yeah, and also people don't realize it, not just in the government sector, but the private sector. I think it's the lowest startup rate in 35 years right now.
Is that right?
Yeah, of small businesses. And at the same time, not just that, with these large companies, there's not as much innovation of generalized startups. So the last time we had a search engine was never, since Google. And the last time we had a social network, for example, this is just commercial space, was 2011, which was Snapchat. And they're, from what I can tell, they're the chief product officers of Facebook at this point. So it's a really problematic situation to not keep innovation going. And the only way for innovation to keep going is through competition. And that's how we do beat these authoritarian regimes, by being competitive and having small startups bubble up upwards to create all kinds of cool things that are coming. I'm sorry, I'm going to have one more quick question. What would be the coolest thing that you think that they could technologically invent? We just showed a jetpack off at Code, for example, which was really disturbing. But what would you think of? What do you think, like the hovercraft that Larry Page is making, or what?
I don't know how cool those things are. Okay, I mean, I certainly don't want flying over my house. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I mean, I think you know, I think there's a lot of room to go in terms of applying machine learning to all kinds of interesting problems, right? I mean, you know, there's the kinds of problems we see in front of us every day. Oh, like image recognition, you know, those kind of things. Okay, but like what we're doing at Oracle is we apply AI and machine learning to business problems, right? And I think you know, using machine learning to make you know, accurate data-driven decisions, I think is it's kind of under the surface. I don't think a lot of people think about that, but I think it has the potential to have a really fundamental impact.
Patterns and things like that. Anything else? Ectoskeletons?
So you'd have to say, in terms of broad applicability, military plus the commercial, AI and the combination of 5G together.
None of you mentioned Elon Musk's neural net link that he wants to put in people's heads. I did an interview with him where he said that AI is not going to kill us, but they're going to treat us like house cats. Yeah. And that we need to put a chip in our head. He said this several years ago so that we can keep up, or it's going to just run us over the way you would run over a group of ants when you're building a highway, which was such a nice view of the world. Anyway, questions from the audience. Let's start right here. You, sir. Yes. Oh, okay, wait for the mic, sorry. Sounds like you have a deep voice, though.
Thank you for that. Every day we see, read about, and impacted by, lack of a better word, break-ins. They steal our social security number. Every credit card company has been challenged. You get all kinds of emails about how we're going to protect you for the next year because all your information went out. It's really getting old. And I have a sense it's not going to get any better. But I'm hopeful that you guys can tell us we're on the right trajectory and we're going to stop all this stuff so I don't have to get IRS codes to put on my tax return and change all my credit cards 3 times a month. Where the hell are we going with this?
Right.
I'll start and love to get others' opinions. I think the good news is that's actually getting better for your own personal security and privacy, right? In some ways, it's the new normal, and you know, it's something that we've just adjusted to and are adjusting to. But also, it's about detection and response. How quickly can we detect that before they've actually kind of used your social or something like that? But the biggest change that I see coming that's happening now is the move away from username and password, which is incredibly insecure, right? It's not that hard to get somebody's password, but as you go to biometric identification, token-based systems, it makes it that much harder for someone to get access to your information.
Yeah, that's so comforting. They're going to have your eyeball, in other words. I say no. I think it's going to get worse. And by the way, it's not necessarily hacking. One of the things that I always say to people is what happened with Facebook, for example, which got a lot of media attention, stuff like that. The Russians were customers of Facebook. They didn't hack it. They were customers.
No.
Like,
well, I think the dichotomy is it's going to get worse and better at the same time.
Like,
so some things are improving,
yeah.
as Tucker just talked about, but then the degree to which Technology
Sensors.
is expanding, sensors, 5G.
Sensors.
The attack surface just got a lot bigger.
It is.
So some things improved, but now there's a whole.
So,
Yeah.
right,
Unplug the nest.
let me just give you some, okay, all those kind of attacks that you mentioned, all those kind of breaches, right? We study those, right? Okay, because we want to understand, many of them are our customers, right? Because we want to understand what happened, right? And most of the time, in most of those breaches, the fundamental problem was human error.
Yeah.
Okay, it was people did not correctly configure the systems to be secure, and most commonly, people did not apply patches to the software to actually make it secure. I mean, software has bugs. Some of those bugs are security related. We, Oracle, and other vendors, we produce patches. Our customers often don't apply them.
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes, very often, our customers can't find all the systems running all the software that needs to be patched. Right, and so that's that. It's that morass, okay, which has created so much consumer exposure to vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Right, and that is why actually I'm optimistic. Right, it's because we're moving to a time when there's much less infrastructure in the hands of these companies that are holding your data. They rely on a much smaller number of parties to deliver the infrastructure and do the patching. Just to give you an example. So,
I'm going to have to get to another question, but go ahead.
okay, just to give you an example here. So when we patch our infrastructure, we patch millions of servers in less than 24 hours. Okay, it's completely automated. Our customers, by the way, don't even know we patched, right? Because we've developed technology that allows us to apply patches without taking software down. Okay, so that's why it's getting better.
Right. Basically, we have to get rid of humans. Okay, next. Let's actually, go ahead, right there, right here.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, next year being an election year and a census year, how reliable do you think our voting machines are in terms of counting the votes?
Well, that's next. That's next. He's going to talk about that. Tom there.
Next?
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, not very. So just overall. It's a disaster.
That's my question,
Technical
particularly vis-a-vis what the rest of the world does.
Yeah.
I know it's a state-by-state issue, but I'm curious to your views.
Yeah, your vote's probably not counted, but go ahead. Next, over here, and then.
You're a real
I am. I'm sorry. That's my famous role in Silicon Valley. It keeps them honest.
Yeah, I'm Guy Swan from the Association of the U.S. Army and a member of the Homeland Security Experts Group. For Mr. Brown, question for you. With so much outreach now from the Defense Department to industry, how do we deal with things like the recent Google employee backlash on some Defense Department programs? That's my first question. Then slightly different, off the cyber just a bit, is additive manufacturing and 3D printing the panacea we hope it's going to be?
3D printing.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so first on Google and Maven, and Defense Innovation Unit was involved in helping the Defense Department put together vendors for Project Maven. The good news is I think this was incredibly well covered by the media, and as it would reflect broad views in Silicon Valley, overblown. So there's different kind of vendors that we work with. Most of them are small companies. They're delighted to have an opportunity to work with a customer as large as DoD. Today, when we ask for help on a problem we're working, we get 30, 40, 50 submissions for each problem. So plenty of help. It becomes more complex for these large multinationals, Google being one. I think they've learned they wouldn't in the future want to crowdsource their business strategy. And I was pleased to see some of the other multinationals, Amazon, Microsoft.
Amazon loves doing it.
Yeah, they've come out and said, the place to exercise that is at the ballot box, and we need to support the government. So that's great to hear.
One of the problems with that is that the companies have let their employees talk for years now. Google had meme gen. They have these meetings where employers get together and scream at the founders almost every week. No, they do. It's like, I don't like the kombucha this week, and they yell about it. And so they've created an employee base that feels that they're part of the system, and they are.
So the bottom line
that's
on
not
working with the Defense Department is we need to be an easier customer for those companies, and that's about speed and getting some money to the right customers. Just quickly on additive manufacturing, I don't think it's a panacea, but incredible progress made with metals, with concrete.
Yeah.
We're now working on a project to allow forward bases for the Marines to be built with additive manufacturing on concrete. So imagine bridges and barracks being built with additive manufacturing using concrete.
There's some cool commercial companies like Carbon and some others that are really cool in that area. It's an area. Okay, last question right here. Sorry, that you can all grab these guys.
Sure. Thank you very much. My name is Bishop Garrison. Just a quick question. We've talked about all these new evolving technologies when you talk about machine learning, AI, and you talk about the skill sets necessary to deal with them, particularly from the next generation. In your respective organizations, have you really begun looking at training in ethics and the development of these technologies and their deployment?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. That Wet Blanket here writes about that in the New York Times a lot. They also need to take humanities courses. Talk about that, and then we'll finish.
Yeah. I mean, so just I can tell you at Oracle. I mean, we have a large AI machine learning research group, and we have machine learning AI experts kind of spread throughout our engineering organization. And so bias and ethics is definitely something that we take into account just as a matter of course. I mean, we're very careful to try to make sure that we don't wind up encoding human bias into the models. I mean, if you think about it, it's not just the right thing to do, it's also the most efficient thing to do, right? If we're trying to find the best employee to do a job, if we encode human bias, that probably means we're bypassing one of the better candidates. So we don't want to do that.
Yeah. And it's any others than that?
The Defense Department, as we have to do with all technologies, is looking at what are the implications ethically, and the Joint AI Center recently set up at the Pentagon is working on this very actively.
And that's going to be a big issue in facial recognition right now. Obviously, the company that makes the cameras that are on police departments doesn't think facial recognition it should be used yet because it's so bad. I might point you to an interview I did with Andy Jassy, who's head of AWS at Amazon, which is a massive business there, around their recognition software, which has been controversial. But it's an interesting debate on the issue. Anyway, this is great. Thank you so much. And I'm sure there'll be tons more to talk about next year. Thank you.